Hello, everyone. I'm John, the counter-apologist, and today I'm going to be doing a bit of a different topic. I'm going to be talking about trans rights. The reason I'm doing this is the YouTube algorithm put one of Trent Horn's videos about transgender advocacy in my feed, and I watched it because I've interacted with Trent and even been on his podcast in a very amicable fashion. And I watched it, and also today, Texas Governor Greg Abbott actually appears to be looking to prosecute parents of trans children who are getting them trans-affirming health care and is looking to criminalize them. I'm not 100% on the issue right now. It doesn't look particularly good if you are a person who is trans or is in favor of trans rights. And so this is particularly timely. And also because this is a very poignant intersection between philosophy of religion and philosophy of gender. And I've actually become a bit aware of philosophy of gender because of my atheism and because of my studying philosophy of religion. A lot of atheist writers are trans, and we'll talk about trans issues. And my general interest in philosophy, there are these two philosophy channels on YouTube. You might have heard of them, run by pretty famous ladies, ContraPoints and Philosophy Tube. And both of these people have formal philosophical training and were doing philosophy videos, generally speaking, and during their career on YouTube, transitioned. They're both incredibly successful women. They make their living, or at least a good portion of it, by being YouTubers. And they have a wealth of videos literally answering the question that Trent says transgender advocates can't answer, which is what is a woman, what is a man, what is the difference between men and women. So I kind of want to go through Trent's philosophy, Trent's examples, and kind of point out what I think are the problems with it in the most the most informed and charitable way that I think I can do it. Besides, it's not like cis het white atheist YouTubers have ever screwed up making a trans video. So how bad can this be, right? Um, so before we get started on the actual trans issues, I want to cut the trans video. He uses an abortion example, and I think it's paradigmatic of a problem that he's going to have in his trans response. So let's just take a quick listen with his one question about abortion.
What are the unborn? If the unborn are human beings, then abortion can't be justified. If the unborn are not human beings, then abortion needs no justification. Who cares?
Okay, so are the unborn human beings? If they're not human beings, then who cares? Why abortion? You don't need a justification to have an abortion. But if they are human beings, then it's not. So the question there is, he's just assuming in his philosophy about human beings is that they are persons with in a morally relevant sense, that have a serious right to life. And so it is not debated whether or not unborn human beings are human or not. It's whether or not they are persons in the morally relevant sense who have a serious right to life. And there are counterexamples that pro-choice people will point out, embryos being one of them, which would beg the question in abortion, but we would also point to brain-dead people being kept alive on machines. They still have a serious right to life. And people will advocate no. And so that's why you have people who are pro-life, like Trent, will also be against people who are terminally ill, uh, basically self-euthanizing and committing physician-assisted suicide because they don't want to go through painful degradation of their bodies when they know is a terminable disease. So this is basically the problem with Trent's video, with Trent's position. It's going to be the philosophy that he brings in, which is very ironic because he's going to try and give us what looks like a scientific answer to a philosophical question. So let's have Trent ask his question. Here we go.
Gender identity, this is the question that I would focus on. What is a woman? Or what is a man? So there's different ways of framing this one question. You could say, what is a woman? Or what is a man? Another way to frame it is, what is the difference between men and women? And that is a question that transgender advocates just cannot answer.
All right. So, yes, Trent, they can answer it. They do answer it. What you have just asked, if you are unaware, is a metaphysical question. It is a hard metaphysical question like, what is a person? What is God? What is a human? What is love? Right? Like, to say, oh, you can't answer this question when there are literal books written by philosophers who support trans rights that are both cis and trans that answer this question, right? So to say that there's no answer um, is just plain silly. It's just you can't give a simple, quick, 1, 2, 20-second answer to this question because it's an in-depth topic. And actually, even then, you sort of can give a quick one. I'm going to attempt one later in the video. So what I want to do here is the immediate response to this that I would do is to say, well, how do you define it, Trent? And he anticipates this, and actually where he spends a lot of his time in the video answering. So I'm going to have him turn the question around, and you can hear what he does.
Turn around and say, okay, smart guy, you do better. You define a man and a woman. And what they'll do at this point is they'll try to point out instances where you have intersex or chromosomal anomalies where we're not sure. And then they'll try to cast doubt on the whole idea that men and women are separate or that we can define them objectively. I mean, my definition would be simple. A man, when it comes to human beings, a man is a human being ordered towards the act of impregnation, and a woman is a human being ordered towards the act of gestation or being pregnant. So you're just going to take it all down to pregnancy? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a huge problem. And the reason it is because he's saying, oh, well, it's an objective answer. And he's pointing to biology and reducing it down to pregnancy. And there are things is, can you get pregnant? Yes or no? And can you carry pregnancy to term? Well, yeah, there is an objective answer to that question. But you'll notice it isn't just that. He has some philosophical assumptions in his very easy answer to the question of what is a man, what is a woman. It is that you are ordered towards insemination or ordered towards pregnancy. So let's let him go a little bit further here. I want to give him the space.
Because we can find biological sex in other animals. One animal in the species impregnates, the other animal is impregnated, or their eggs are fertilized, whatever it may be. We see this in all other kinds of non-human animals. The same is going to carry over to human beings. That's the basic biological difference. Now, of course, if a man is unable to have sex, if he's impotent, or if a woman is unable to become pregnant, she's infertile, she doesn't stop being a woman, and the man doesn't stop being a man. The definition is, what are you naturally ordered towards?
Now, this is critical. So obviously the counter answer is like, well, yes, like young women or postmenopausal women can't get pregnant. Certain men can't inseminate, and so we still call those people male and female. And he's gonna reduce it down to chromosomes because the anti-trans people love chromosomes, but he knows there's a problem. That's why he's bringing in his Thomistic metaphysics, his Thomistic theology, in basically saying the ordered towards, right? Which is a lot of philosophy being layered on top of biological answers. Now, you're going to see I skip ahead quite a bit in the video because he basically goes over, he wants to say, XX female, XY male. And then he goes through, he's trying to give anti-trans people a better argument because he knows if you say, XX female, XY male, there's all these counterexamples that disprove this because we have these people who don't fit into that paradigm that we will readily call male and female who also can either inseminate or carry a pregnancy to term. And he sort of gives the game away. And this is going to expose the problem with his underlying philosophy.
Males, 1 in 30,000. So when you have the Y chromosome, specifically the SRY gene on the chromosome, that is what controls for masculine development. So even in these anomalies, the presence of a Y almost in every case tells us that this is a biological male.
key phrase there is almost always tells us. Um, and I think I just kind of want to keep drawing out the problems that he's going to have here. So I'm giving him more rope to hang himself with. Um, and let's go with his next point.
Transgender advocates cannot answer the question, what is a man, what is a woman? Because it's totally subjective. But we know men and women are not the same thing. The biological definition is superior, but you got to be careful here because biology can be a bit quirky. I like men are ordered towards impregnation. Women are the ones who are ordered towards gestation, even if they can't become pregnant yet, or they can never become pregnant or can't get pregnant again. What are you ordered towards biologically? Most of the time, our chromosomes do tell us this. XX.
Okay. So he says that this is a biological answer to the question, but then he pivots to not directly reducing it to chromosomes, but ordered towards, which is completely philosophical, metaphysical, and very much based in his Thomistic metaphysics. Um, so what makes this so odd is that he wants the objectivity where you could just point to science and be like, there's a biological reductionistic answer to gender. But he knows there's problems with it, and what him and even non-theistic anti-trans people do is they want to hold on to there are only two genders, right? And they, for some reason, maybe there's some secular anti-trans people who don't have this bug up their butt, but for Trent and the theists, they want, especially the Christians, they want to hold on to, which he says in the video, and God created them male and female. So he's making, what he's making really is, what I've said it before, is a biological reductionistic view. And that basically just means that gender just reduces to biology and biological sex, and that is determined by chromosomes. But he wants to keep this two gender thing, but he goes over in his video all of these different intersex categories. And I think biological reductionism fails, and we'll talk about why. But if you wanted to make a biological reductionist argument, you could at least state it far better if you were like, well, XX female, XY male, and then there are n number of intersex different genders, so to speak, because there are all these intersex percentage of the population that we find. And they're just somewhere in between. But 99% of all trans people are either XX or XY, and they're deluding themselves, right? And I think this is false, right? But at least that would be a principled statement of the biological reductionist view of gender. Now, I want to get to where Trent, he knows there's a big problem coming, and he tries to head it off. So I want to let him present the problem and his best defense of it. So here's Trent stating the big problem for his view.
The only examples that might be different are La Chapelle syndrome. This is XX that has the SRY gene from the Y chromosome, so they develop masculine characteristics as well. I read in the literature a case of someone who is XX, but they had chromosomal mosaicism, so they had elements of the Y chromosome within the X chromosomes, and so they were XY, but they were able to become pregnant. So they're XY, but they were able to carry a pregnancy to term. There's only this one case I've been able to find, and when we find cases like this, I would say the outliers do not disprove the general rule.
So the problem here is, well, yes, it does. I think it does, and it's specifically because he's talking about we are ordered towards insemination or pregnancy. Except here's a clear case where it's not, and I don't know if the case he found is what I've seen. I think there was a case of two women who were married. One of them was trans, and before she transitioned, she sired children with her wife, and then she had some abdominal problems, got checked out, and it turns out that she has a uterus, despite the fact that she had male genitalia and sired children. And so uh, she transitioned in it was her 40s or 50s. She stayed together with her wife. She joked about how her wife took her to get her first bra, um, and it turns out she could carry a pregnancy to term despite the fact that she was trans. And so to say that we are ordered toward this, well, no, that teleology is false. Evolution disproves it. Because we have cases like this, right? So, in order for to account for this, right, that God created the male and female, and well, how do we get these intersex things? Well, God used evolution, but then that kind of throws out the whole fall thing, right? Because sin and death and everything existed while, and evil and pain and suffering all existed during the evolutionary process. And we had these uh, intersex people, and intersex members of different different animals throughout our evolutionary history. I mean, sexual development actually came out of asexual reproduction. There were evolutionary pressures that pushed us in that way, right? But to say that we are ordered towards it is just wrong. These intersex things happen because of the imperfections in reproduction and the evolutionary process. So to say that we're ordered towards it, I think is just clearly false. It's a incorrect piece of metaphysics, and Trent has to account for this on the basis of the fall and or maybe some really weird things about God's planning. So I mean, maybe you could say it is ultimately unfalsifiable when he adds enough stuff to it, but I think this is a clear counterexample. Now, I want to give him one last clip where he wants to argue where these counterexamples don't count against his view. So let's let him take it away.
Brain death. There was an individual named TK who was completely brain dead, but was able to still live, process nutrients, and continue to grow and live for decades. He was on a ventilator and a feeding tube, but he didn't decompose. He continued to live even though he was brain dead. But the vast majority of the time, it's pretty clear when you're brain dead, when you're have total brain death, you're dead. So just as the case of TK is a strange, unusual brain death case, does not show we have no idea if people are alive or dead. We have no idea who's alive and who's dead. That weird anomaly with brain death cases doesn't disprove the general universal binary between life and death. The weird cases in the medical literature of someone who's XY and becomes pregnant because they have chromosomal mosaicism, that weird single isolated case does not disprove the universal binary. There are men, there are women, those two roles are required for sexual reproduction.
So the money quote is right there. It's like this one exception does not disprove the universal binary. It's not a universal binary if there are exceptions, right? That's not what universal means. And just because you have one that you're finding doesn't mean that there haven't been more that weren't found in the history of us before we had medical science to be able to be like, well, this person who sired children actually has a uterus and has felt out of place their entire life, and then transitions to being a woman because society didn't let transitions happen. And so this thing with brain death is actually really weird. I'm old enough to have witnessed multiple family members die in a hospital, and have had multiple cases where that person was brain dead, and they were on a ventilator, and they had a feeding tube, and they were alive for a couple of days because in different instances the plug was pulled later rather than sooner. And the thing is that this happens. This is not a onesie twosie thing. This is what feeding tubes and breathing tubes do. So to say that we don't know the difference between life and death. Well, yes, we do. There's differences between women. Yes, but it's not doesn't reduce to something so simple as chromosomes or being able to get pregnant or not being able to get pregnant. Or being ordered towards, because the ordered towards thing is some very specific philosophy that you're making in assumptions of your framework that you're bringing to the table that the people who are trans affirming reject. Now, what's really important here is that what Trent's done is do a teleology-infused version of biological reductionism, which is a trans-exclusive view of gender. And a lot like all metaphysical topics, and in philosophy of religion, philosophy of gender is a deep field. And there are trans-inclusive views of gender. One of the most popular ones and most accessible to non-experts would be the performative view of gender. And this has a huge number of advantages over the biological reductionist view of gender, which goes down to being able to get pregnant or inseminate, having genitalia of different kinds, or secondary sex characteristics, or chromosomes. And that's because in the overwhelming amount of interactions between men, women, non-binary or gender fluid people, there's no test. People, when they address me as a man, don't take a look in my pants. They don't do a chromosome test. They look at me, and I present as a male. I have a number of characteristics that are generally had by men, right? And so I fit easily into one of the two stereotypes, and I'm treated as a male. There are other ones where there are women who they look like women. They have breasts, or they don't. Maybe they don't, right? I mean, just because you have breasts or not doesn't necessarily mean whether or not you're a woman. The point being is that you can look at them, and there are people who have had surgeries where they have vaginas, right? And they can't get pregnant, but so neither can a postmenopausal woman, or even women who are of childbearing age but have medical conditions where they can't get pregnant. You still call them women. So to say that, oh, we could do a chromosomal test and then say, well, you're a male, you don't do that. That's not how we look at things. That's not how gender interactions work in the overwhelming majority of cases. So this is the main argument against the biological reductionist view of gender, just because that's not how we operate in the overwhelming majority of our interactions. So to say that, we're ordered towards is this kind of, when you get into it, a weighty metaphysical assumption that he's making, and you compare it to the trans-inclusive view, where you just look at how we interact with people. There was an experiment where they had trans people take pictures in the bathroom of the opposite gender that they identify with. So there was pictures of some trans men in the women's room, and there's a bunch of female-presenting people who are aghast because there's a man in the woman's room, and the person they've got muscles, tattoos, they don't have breasts, they have a beard, piercings. He looks like a man. You would address that person as a man, just like you would address me as a man. And there were women. They have breasts. They're wearing a dress. They have long hair. Their eyes, the facial structure, everything. Like, they just look like a woman, but they're in the men's room, and the guys are just kind of like either checking her out or whatever. And it's just very weird, because even if they have the chromosomes, socially and how we interact with gender, you don't treat them that way. So this is why Trent's view doesn't work. At least is why I don't think it works. And I don't want to say that if you're going to be trans-inclusive, you have to have a performative theory of gender. As I said at the beginning, there are so many books written by cis and trans philosophers that talk about this, because it is a giant metaphysical area which ultimately becomes unfalsifiable. And yes, they do answer the question. And the performative theory of gender is one answer to the question. It's more complicated, or at least it's not as simplistic as a straight reductionism, but the bulk of Trent's video goes over all of the empirical counterexamples to the simple biological reductionism that he has. And so this is why I think his view is false. I think the philosophy he's bringing into the question is false, or at least as unconvincing. Even if you were trans exclusive, I think you can see why Trent doesn't have a quick and easy answer to it, and why he's bringing in a lot of philosophical assumptions to a question and pretending it's simple when it really isn't very simple. So if I haven't convinced you to be trans inclusive in your views of gender, I hope I've at least shown you that there is a lot to the question that is kind of being glossed over here. Um, but I think it is important to realize that trans rights are human rights, and I think that trans inclusive views of gender more closely track with how we interact with people every day, cis or trans, and that they're people just like us. They deserve rights. It's not hard to treat them as the gender that they want to present as. Um, and uh, if if you have any feedback for me on this, if I've made mistakes, please let me know. I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Thank you.